But keep in mind, once again, I have limited criminal jurisdiction, so we get complaints all the time where a police department or a sheriff's department won't investigate and then they'll ask us to. But we don't have jurisdiction in most of those areas.
But the law now gives you jurisdiction
in this area,
to investigate
yes.
and prosecute.
In this area, yes. And when we have the fact pattern where the local DA won't, we're going to clearly assess. But I would suggest to you that most of the DAs will. For instance, we had one mortgage fraud case that we prosecuted this past year. But consistent with what I said before, we've seen the numbers really drop once the legislation passed, and we expect that it will drop, that the problem will drop now based on, number one, the national settlement and the servicing standards, as well as legislation such as House Bill 237. But if your question is if a local DA isn't going to do their job, or a local sheriff, are we going to assist? The answer is yes.
I called around to a number of district attorneys' offices, and I couldn't find any active investigations into this issue.
Well, the bill just passed. The bill just became effective July 1. Now, let's be clear what we mean by that.
But fraud has always been illegal.
You can't go back and date. When the legislation's in effect July 1, if we get an investigation that shows fraud June 1, the law wasn't in effect, and we can't prosecute.
But it's always been illegal to submit false documents.
True. But
isn't that what the banks did?
Look, it's much more complicated than that. When you're dealing with the foreclosure process, most of the time the documents weren't being changed in the state. Most of the time it was through MERS or with the big institutions. That's why we frankly saw changes in the bill that unfortunately are not in the final version of the bill. Unlike a regular fraud case, the foreclosure process is much more difficult to prosecute because so much of the activity is not occurring in your home state.
So it isn't necessarily where the document was submitted or the county in which it was submitted. You're telling me the crime may have occurred in Florida where the document was notarized and signed.
Absolutely, and I don't have jurisdiction when the activity occurred out of state. It's very difficult to handle it. It's not like a regular fraud case where, you know, all the documents are made here, they're filed here. When you're talking the foreclosure process, generally those big financial institutions are not located in our state. The documents are not created in our state, and it is a much more difficult process.
All right. What happens now if someone calls your office and says, I've got fraudulent documents? What do you do?
Okay, we don't have investigators in our office in this area. We use the resources of the GBI. So if someone calls our office, we're going to send it to our Special Criminal Prosecutions Unit. If we feel we've been given sufficient information, we will forward that to our friends at the Georgia Bureau of Investigation. But keep in mind, once again, it has to occur July 1 and forward. We don't have jurisdiction before July 1.
The forgery of your documents occurred in Georgia.
Yes.
So the Georgia Attorney General would have jurisdiction over what happened in the state.
Absolutely.
And the fact that he hasn't done anything, is that upsetting to you?
Yeah, it's more confusing for me. It's upsetting, but you know, if it rains when you're ready to go for a picnic, that's upsetting. Mm-hmm. If somebody